Hey, hi, hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jesse, and today I'm bringing you guys another reading vlog. Last year I followed a BOOKTUBER'S annotation guide, and today I'm bringing you part 2. I thought it would be fun to follow more annotation guides because everybody has a different way of annotating, and I still have not achieved annotation girly status, and that's the goal. That's the aim. That's what I want to be. I feel like if I follow more of these guides, I'll be able to find what works for me and grow into the
annotation god that I want to become.
I'm sorry, I took that way too far. Not the first time I've taken something way too far, and not the last time that I will take something way too far. But it's good to have goals, even if I'll never become an annotation god. The booktuber or YouTuber that I chose for this video is Sweet Tea to High Tea. I will leave a link down below in the description to their channel and the video that I'm going to be referencing. I did in fact buy all the supplies that they mentioned in their video, even though I didn't necessarily need to. I did, so supplies haul! First up here we've got these Sharpie pens. I actually use Sharpie pens on the dailies, so I was happy to buy more Sharpie pens. These are the ultra fine ones, so they're 0.38 millimeters, and I believe she uses these for underlining. Next up here we've got these Pentel pens, which are needle tip. They are extra fine and 0.3 millimeters. I believe that she uses these to take notes in the margins and whatnot. Next we have some new highlighters to try out. I'll admit I'm still a lover of midliners. They are my favorite highlighter brand, but it's nice to step out of our comfort zones and try new things. So I'm going to be trying these. These are Olahaster. I think that's how you say it. Alohaster? Alohaster? Alohaster. Alohaster? That's the brand. This is the brand. These are apparently really trendy with the annotation girlies these days. We'll see how I end up feeling about these though. And of course we've got ourselves some tabs. There are so many tabs in this pack that I picked up, though she said that it doesn't really matter the tabs specifically that you pick up and use. She more so cares about the consistency of the tabs in terms of like them all lining up perfectly in the books, which is honestly something that I struggle with. I am not good at getting the tabs to line up really nicely. Like I feel like there are some people that their tabs just look so beautiful, like so nice. Even though I personally don't really love looking at a book and seeing the tabs stick out, I still respect when people are able to like line them up so nicely. So I'm gonna do my best, gonna try my best, give it a shot, because I'm trying to become an annotation god, and an annotation god needs to be able to line them up perfectly. Now let's go over her tips and guidelines, the things that I'm going to be trying my best to follow throughout this reading vlog. I wrote them down on a little note just so that I have it next to me while I'm reading so I can reference it. She has a few methods that she uses. The first is how she approaches what she is actually marking within the book, which I actually really find this to be very helpful because I feel like I just never know what to mark, and I end up just like stressing out and being like, what should I mark? What should I do? And so I end up like spiraling instead of like actually reading and marking. So she uses this guide. It says, does this passage make me smile or laugh, cry or get emotional, feel curious or think deeply? These are things that she is referencing and thinking about as she's reading, and then it helps her figure out what to mark. I feel like this is something that'll be incredibly helpful for me because I just feel dumbfounded when I am reading and annotating. I either find myself marking everything and being like, why am I marking everything? Or I end up not marking anything because I'm just second guessing myself the whole way through. Then she has specific guidelines for the different things that she is doing while annotating. So for example, what she uses highlights for, underlines for. So let's go over that. This is something that I'm going to find incredibly helpful as well, because I feel like it's nice to have different markings for different things, and I never know what to use specific markings for. So it's going to be nice to just have like a guide as I am marking. So for highlighting, it's direct quotes, character interactions, banter, etc. Underlining is key statements. And she was very clear in the fact of being like, don't underline a whole page. Pick something that is very significant within that page and underline that. Find something that like feels the most meaningful and specifically underline that section. Don't go through and underline the whole thing, because when you look back on your annotations, if the whole page is underlined, it's not that helpful. You want to be able to look back on your annotations and understand why you marked specific things. So just like marking a whole page is not helpful. But she mentions the fact that like if there is a big section that you want to remember, you can just use brackets and make a little note to yourself as to why you are marking that. Circling is for one single word. You might read a quote or a piece of dialogue, and there's like one specific word that like made you feel some kind of way, or that you feel like made that statement stronger, and circling that word just like emphasizes that. Then she has combination, where she will underline and highlight for extra emphasis. If there's something that's like really standing out to you, you'll just combine both underlining and highlighting in order to like make that line jump out. I feel like I already feel really good about this because having reasons for each technique technique is so helpful and beneficial for me because I feel like I was just approaching annotation not really having specific reasons for underlining or highlighting things, and I feel like really breaking it up is really opening my eyes and having me really excited to annotate. Finally, she uses a color tab system, and I'm going to be using something somewhat similar. I'm going to have to kind of like feel it out as I'm reading, but basically she has a color for quotes, a color for romance, a color for emotions, things that make her curious, and just a color for general things that she likes. So I'm going to be using a similar method, but I just need to like pick out my colors and kind of figure out what I'm going to do specifically before I dive into my book. Again, I'm going to link her video down below in the description. I highly recommend going and checking out. It's super thorough, and it has me going into this annotation process feeling really confident and excited. Speaking of the actual book, let's talk about the book that I'll be reading for this vlog. I decided that I'm going to be reading the sequel to Before the Coffee Gets Cold. For the first annotation video I did, I read the first book and I freaking loved it, by the way. I still think about that book constantly, so it only felt right to go ahead and read the sequel and annotate the sequel as well. If you don't know the premise of Before the Coffee Gets Cold, basically it takes place in a cafe where people are able to travel back in time so long as they come back before their coffee gets cold. There's certainly a lot more to it in terms of like the specifics of the time travel element, but that's just kind of the overall gist of the story. I loved the first book because it was filled with so many beautiful lines. We have so many different characters who are on such different journeys and so many different reasons for going back into the past, and I just adored every little bit of it. I was afraid that it was going to be one of those books that was overhyped, but I personally really connected with it, and I'm super excited to read the sequel. I have heard that the sequels are not as good as the first book, but I'm still going into this one open-minded and also super excited. I've got my supplies, I've got my guidelines, I've got my book. Let's get started. Update time. Let's talk about annotation thoughts first. I definitely had to do a bit of an adjustment as I started reading, so I sort of switched up my intentions on what I was marking to not only fit my personal preferences on what I wanted to mark, but also for the book itself, because this is not a book where it's like cute, fun moments are happening or like funny dialogue. It's not one of those books. It's rather serious the whole way through and has a lot of like emotional moments. For the most part, I feel like it stays in this like really thoughtful, deep place. So I sort of like switched up my intentions, my thought process on what I was marking. But once I figured that out, I definitely fell into a bit of a flow with the overall annotation style. So my markings so far are based on deep thoughts, character interactions, character details, and then also just descriptions. I found for me in my process that being more vague is more helpful. Instead of again being very specific on like, this is funny dialogue or this is cute dialogue, this is a really romantic dialogue. For me, it's more helpful to be vague. And then when I flip through, it's pretty easy to tell my intentions on what I'm marking. But again, I feel like this is also very specific to this book itself, because again, it's not going to have those like cute, fun, romantic things happening throughout the book. So it's very specific to this. If I was reading a cutesy romance book, then I'm sure that my markings would be heavily affected by that. I also realized when I began reading this book that I love marking beautiful descriptions. I'm someone that is heavily impacted by the overall style of writing. It's something that I pay attention to a lot when I'm reading a book, and that oftentimes comes through in the descriptions for me. So I added that to my roster because I noticed throughout this book that there were a few little details that I just like really loved, and I wanted to like be able to go back and remember and look through. So I'm super excited to have that as a part of my tabbing roster. I think having specific thoughts and reasons for the specific annotating tools, whether it be why am I underlining this, why am I highlighting this, why am I putting this in brackets, has been incredibly beneficial for me, because more times than not I would question why I was highlighting something or why I was underlining something, and I also was not consistent in what I was highlighting and what I was underlining. So having specific reasons as to why I'm underlining something or why I'm highlighting something has been so helpful for me. I also realized that I am referencing something that I learned in the last annotation video that I did, again, linked down below in the description. That is approaching the process of reading and annotating as you having a conversation with the book that you're reading. And this is the perfect series to do that with, because as you're reading, you have so many questions pop up. Things like, would you want to go to the past? If you were to go to the past, who would you want to meet? What would you want to do? What would you want to say to them? And in the first story that popped up in the first section of this book, I was questioning if I was in the position of this character, would I make the same choices? So it's a great book to use that approach with. I really love that I'm learning new tools, but also referencing ones that I've used in the past. Now let's talk about the book itself. This bookmark is kind of driving me crazy, I'm not gonna lie. I keep flip-flopping it, but I enjoyed that first story so much. I was nervous going in because I had heard that it's like not as good as the first book, but like so far, it's maintaining the greatness of the first book. I'm just putting that out there. The first story is called Best Friend. I'm not going to give like too many details on specifically what is happening in this story, but we are following Gotaro, and he has been left with his best friend's daughter after his best friend's passing. There's a specific reason why he wants to go into the past and talk to his best friend, and it's something that could affect his life, but also his relationship with his best friend's daughter for forever. It's a situation that could fully fracture his relationship with his best friend's daughter, and this is something that he does not want to happen. He's sort of found himself in a position where he has no choice but to sort of like face this situation head on. So it's a really interesting situation. Not only is it interesting going back into the past and seeing sort of the interactions there, but also like we just get such a great understanding for their relationship. The author does a fantastic job of laying the groundwork for establishing the deep connection that Gotaro has with his best friend. His best friend's name is Shuichi, by the way. We see at Gotaro's lowest how Shuichi was like one of the only people to be there for him and to back him up. When everyone else turns their back on Gotaro, Shuichi was a ride or die kind of guy, and we stand. So you see this really complicated spot that Gotaro has found himself in, and seeing how it's weighing on him. It's a situation that has to do with lying, and honestly, I know that honesty is the best policy, but I do understand why he lied in this situation. When we go into the past and we see these best friends reunite, when I tell you I melted, I became a full-on puddle in my feels. I melted with the interactions they had. I was just like fully on the verge of tears. I did not cry, like I was on the verge, like that watery coating was starting. And I think honestly the reason I felt so emotional was mostly because of Shuichi and his character, just how great of a person he is. Because even when he realized what's happened to him, his immediate thought is, how do I help Gotaro? He prioritizes trying to solve Gotaro's problem, and if that doesn't showcase his ride or die nature, I don't know what will. I love seeing a lot of familiar faces throughout this first story, and I hope that we continue to see more people pop up throughout the book. I imagine that they will, but we'll see. The first story did have me leaving it desiring a bit more closure, but I imagine that we will circle back to the situation later on. Those are my thoughts so far. So far I'm enjoying it just as much as book one, so let's hope that it maintains that feeling for me. Time. First, more annotation thoughts. Still loving this method. I have a few gripes, not with this method or this technique, more so with myself. I'm griping over myself, critiquing myself. My first one is my handwriting. It is atrocious. I've written a few little notes here and there in the margins, and every time my eye catches it, it twitches because of just how ugly it is. I honestly feel like my handwriting has worsened the older that I've gotten, because I pretty much only type either on a laptop computer or even just my phone. So I'm just not used to handwriting anymore. So basically, your boy needs to improve because currently it's giving first grade handwriting with a grade of C-. And that's not cutting it. That's not doing it for me. In fact, it's giving me a headache every time I freaking see it in the margins. I will say I'm getting better at tabbing. I've seen improvement when it comes to that. More so aligning the tabs consistently. The last time I annotated and used tabs, I just had a hard time like lining them up nicely. It just ended up being wonky and all over the place. I was trying my best, but my best was not cutting it. But I feel like I've improved. I've gotten better. They've lined up quite nicely. I don't like to stick my tabs out too far, I will say. And I'm still getting used to these kind of tabs because I prefer book darts. Those are my tabs of choice. And honestly, I feel like even after I finish all these courses, all these annotation videos that I'm following, I still am probably going to resort back to just using book darts. Finally, this last part might be triggering for some of you. I've been having to break the spine while annotating, which for me is not that big of a deal, but I know for a lot of y'all, it is a very big deal and it's not something that you want to do when you're reading paperback books. I don't care as much about the aesthetics of a book these days. Like, I just want to read the book. I more so care about the story. Now, 5 years ago, I would have been having a stroke over me breaking the spine, but currently I'm like, it is what it is. The spine is breaking. So if you plan on annotating the Before the Coffee Gets Cold paperbacks, just beware of the fact that you're probably going to break the spine. Now, book thoughts. I read the story Mother and Son, and it was so sad, so devastating, honestly, and also relatable at the same time. I will say it's my least favorite story in this book so far because I feel like we just didn't have enough time to kind of grasp the situation. It's also on the triggering side of things because it deals with suicidal ideation in a sort of roundabout way. It's not like super clear, but by the end of it, you kind of understand what it's trying to say. It's just kind of like coding it in a way where it's not like super detailed. We have this character who has big dreams in terms of making a name for himself in the pottery world, and I feel like him finding his passion and then running after his passion are the things that I found the most relatable. And it's very clear that he has not had a very smooth journey. He also has a lot of people judging him and his decision to chase after this dream. So we kind of see him on his journey of struggling, not only with like people judging him, but also him just like not achieving the success that he wants for himself. He felt uneasy about how uncertain his future was. His was a life with no guarantees. Yet he still clung to that thin strand of hope that he would fulfill his dream and make his mother proud. I really enjoyed seeing him find his passion for pottery because he describes himself as dull before kind of finding his passion, and I just really loved seeing how that kind of like transformed his life and how it only took like one spark to kind of ignite this flame inside of him, this burning fiery passion inside of him, and it just was so inspiring seeing that moment in particular. And I think that that's something that's so cool to think about, how something so simple can just like alter you completely, change who you are or change how you view something, or just like open up your eyes and pave a new passion path for you, basically. I think that that's just so cool to think about. It wasn't that he was dissatisfied with his ordinary life. It was just that from somewhere in his heart he heard, I want to find work that is worth spending a lifetime on. We learn a big detail about Kazoo in this chapter, who is the barista, who is the one that pours the coffee for the person that goes back into the past. I feel like she's a character that we get more and more details on over time, and I really like that kind of progression. And I feel like there's an air of mystery about her, but we know certain details about her personality, and it's just really interesting what we did learn in this chapter about her. I feel like it's something that I probably should have expected and I probably should have seen, but I didn't expect it and I didn't see it. I will say I noticed that Kazoo's character is the type that kind of like stirs the pot a little bit. Specifically in this chapter, I feel like she calls out somebody and then just dips. She's like, I'm gonna spill some tea and then I'm gonna yeet on out of here. Still really loving this. This story in particular was not my favorite, but I'm still enjoying it and I'm excited to see where it goes in the next few stories. Update time. Let's first do a little bit of an annotation update. I think I'm going to comment on the supplies because I feel like I've spent enough time with everything that I can comment on the things, I can critique them, and tell you how I feel about them. First up, we've got the tabs. I just feel fine about the tabs. I still much prefer book darts. These little doodads, these will always be superior to me. These will always be my favorite. I will always prefer them over the colored tabs. I have grown to like be okay about the colored tabs, but again, book darts are my favorite. Next, we've got the pins. I do really like the Pentel needle tip pin. I feel like it's really nice for writing in like tight spaces, specifically writing in a book. You have small areas that you can work with. And I just feel like it's really nice for those small spaces. And I also feel like it doesn't bleed, which is really nice. It doesn't bleed through to the next page. I also really like the Sharpie S Gel in 0.38 millimeters. This one I use for underlining. The Pentel one is the one that I've been using to take notes. I will say I do want to go up a size, but I'm afraid that the bleedage for the next level is going to be even worse than this. This one doesn't bleed too bad necessarily, but it still bleeds. If that's something that's like a deal breaker for you, then I don't know that I would recommend this for underlining necessarily. I haven't done any like notes or thoughts in the margins with this one, but I imagine it would bleed with notes. If it's bleeding with underlining, I would assume that it also bleeds with note taking. Lastly, we've got the highlighter, which is the Alohaster. Can't decide how that's pronounced still. I still haven't looked up how it's pronounced. I feel okay about this. I think I still much prefer the midliners. I think that those are just going to be my go-to. They've been my go-to. They've been my ride or die. I will say that this highlighter is really light, and I've been finding myself having to do a couple layers in order for it to kind of like pop. I feel like a lot of people like this kind of style, like that kind of lighter look to their highlights. If you're somebody that likes light highlighting, just a little pop of color, then I would recommend these. Personally, they're fine. I don't have like a big problem with them, but just to get like the thickness of ink that I like when it comes to highlighting, I'm having to do just a couple of layers. So it really depends on your preference when it comes to annotating. Those are all my thoughts on the supplies. I definitely see myself using these pens in the future. So I think these are the winner chicken dinners. Now, book thoughts. I finished the story, The Lovers. I will say, while I do enjoy how a lot of these stories are emotional, I would love to see a story or two be thrown in there that's not like so heartfelt. Like I think it would be nice to just have a person going into the past just for like kicks and giggles and not have such a serious storyline. I just would like to see some lighter stories thrown in the mix. I'm not saying that we have to like completely get rid of all the emotional stories and all these like heartfelt stories, because I think that they're important and I do get a lot out of them, but I just think it would be nice to have like a little bit of a break from those like emotional stories. I think the most interesting part of this section though was learning even more about Kazu's lore. My heart just like sunk learning more about her story because it just is so dark and so sad and devastating. It was one of those situations where it was both gut-wrenching and heart-stabbing. I've got one story left, so let's see how I end up feeling about the final story. Update time. I finished reading Before the Coffee Gets Cold, Tales from the Cafe, and the last story was so emotional, which I could say that about every story throughout this series. It really runs out my emo credit, and I need to turn around and immediately read something incredibly happy in order to squash my emo debt that I found myself in after reading this book. In the last story, we circled back to a character that was brought up in an earlier story, and I really enjoyed seeing that journey and like where his character ended up, because there were hints of his story being unveiled early on, but it like didn't really delve deep. And I feel like we delved deeper into his background and his reasoning for being in the book. And we also got a lot more detail on Kazu's character, and I think that that's something that I've appreciated about this sequel so much, is learning more about characters who might not have been as explored earlier on. And so we really delved deep into her character throughout this book, and that's something that I just found myself really appreciating, especially because I just like grew to love her even more learning about her in this book and learning about the things that she's been through and just how she's been feeling. Like, whoa, it's got me feeling some kind of way. This last story was really interesting too, because it opens up about this like eagerness to shed winter and move on to spring, to kind of like change seasons, which, hi hello, as a winter hater, I find this incredibly relatable. Besides the point, I found the intro to this chapter talking about the changing of seasons to kind of parallel what was going on with the characters and the emotions of the characters, going through a season of life where you're carrying the weight of whatever it is you're going through, and then finally reaching a season where you're able to let go and put things in perspective. And I just really loved that parallel. I ended up landing on a 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this book, and I'm glad that I decided to keep annotating this series. Now, final thoughts on the annotation guide and developing my own process. There are definitely elements in Sweet Tea to High Tea's guide that I'm going to be taking and working into my own style. I think the main part is just going to be having intentions for each tool used, because that was just so eye-opening for me, because I felt so like in the dark as to what I should be highlighting and what I should be underlining. And I know that part of that is like you figuring out what works for you, but I think it is nice when you're starting out to have somebody just like hold your hand and be like, you should try doing this. So that's what I found really helpful in this guide in particular, is just having those intentions for each specific thing. I think I am still figuring out what I personally enjoy when it comes to the tools that I use, but I think the one tool that I will for sure be carrying over is the Pentel pen. I will definitely be using this moving forward because it's just perfect for tight spaces, and when you're annotating in books, there's not a lot of room to work with a lot of the time, so having a pen that works well in those tight spaces is ideal, and that's why I will definitely be working with this in the future. That's it for my thoughts on the annotation guide. I highly recommend Sweet Tea to High Tea's guide if you are somebody who is new to annotating or wants to get into it but has felt a little bit lost in terms of like what you want to do exactly. I feel like following her guide is a step in the right direction. It's very beginner friendly and very thorough, and I just highly recommend checking out her video and also checking out her channel, so I will link it all down below in the description. Go and show her some love. Let me know down below in the comments if you have any annotation tips or tricks from me. Also, let me know down below in the comments which annotation guide video I should follow next. I think at some point in this annotation series I do want to follow your tips and tricks, so again, be sure to drop me some down below in the comments, and at some point in the series I will be following y'all's specific tips and tricks. If you like this video, be sure to go and hit that like button. If you want to see more bookish content from me, be sure to go and hit subscribe or go and hit that bell icon, and you'll be notified every time I post new videos. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope your day is bright, that tomorrow is brighter. Keep reading what your heart desires, and I will see you soon with a new video. Bye-o!